Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 297 for Monday, May 13th, 2024. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all major podcast platforms, including YouTube. If you're enjoying the show, consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Johnny, but the internet knows me as Pixel Riffs, and joining me, as always, brick by brick, is Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
Hello, and if you would like to hear more about my new LEGO set, if you would like to hear more about the games like Animal Well that Johnny is playing and Have a Nice Death that I may be playing in the future, you should listen to the Render Distance. That is the extended version of the podcast that we record every week. We spend the first 15 or 20 minutes of our Monday mornings talking about what we've been doing on the weekend, what is new and interesting in our lives, and you might find it just as interesting. You can go to patreon.com/thespawnchunks and support the show and get the extended version every single week. We also have a live recording. That's every Monday at 10 a.m. Atlantic here in Atlantic, Canada, or 2 p.m. in the UK. If you'd like to join us live, that's also happening in the Discord, a benefit for our members. And the monthly Minecraft Hangout, which is usually the last Saturday of the month, that's coming up on May 25th. That's where we hang out with members in our community, talk about what they've been building as they share screenshots in our live Discord chat.
And it's fun that we've been talking about Lego in the pre-show because some people have even been sharing stuff that they built in Lego, which is always a delightful hobby to share with everybody. But moving on to our quick login, how's the week been for you, Joel? What's new on the Citadel?
So it's been relatively quiet for me, actually, because this weekend is Mother's Day weekend in Canada. So right. I spent a good part of the weekend visiting family, went down to the valley to visit my mom with my sister and her husband and their kid. And it was a nice family visit, but it meant one less stream day. I also had some technical glitches that screwed up another stream day. And as we mentioned in the pre-show, I started a new Lego set. So my Friday stream was dedicated to starting the TIE Interceptor, the UCS set from Lego, which is fantastic, but meant I really only had one Minecraft stream this week. And it was, again, focused on the Lilac Farmstead. And there is a deep slate wall that goes around the entire farm. And that was just roughed in. And so what I did on Thursday was I went around and I did all the special like texture things with like the slabs and the cracked deep slate and the cobbled deep slate. I think I even had a couple of polished bricks in there, adding in different slabs to make it look like it's been broken down in places or, overlap. And it actually was a really nice result. I haven't done all of the kind of overgrowth and vegetation around the whole thing. It was mostly just the wall that I was focusing on. Again, because like the inventory that you have to have, like I can't fit everything in my inventory that I want in terms of block variants. So you kind of have to go and do a structure pass with all of the blocks that you want to use. Because I also had to work with some of the dirt textures and stuff around. And then you have to go back in with like all of your vegetation, like your different kinds of bushes, your flowers, your grasses, your ferns and all that. So that's next. So in some places, it doesn't look particularly overgrown. It's pretty plunked on the landscape. However, on the front, I did some time and put in bushes and berries and overgrowth and all that kind of stuff. And I think it looks pretty good. I really like the contrast between the dark deep slate wall and the light pink of the lilacs and other flowers I've got going on. The greens of the azalea bushes, which are pretty bright anyway. And so again, contrasted with the dark deep slate, it looks pretty cool. And all the other walls around, including the road in West Hill, are all normal gray stone bricks. So again, the deep slate stands out against that. So it's been pretty fun. I mean, I'm looking forward to finishing this up. I'm really close. I just haven't been able to like get in and spend like a full week in Minecraft because I was like sick one week and I had a back issue the other week and then I had Mother's Day. So like it's just been an adulting scheduling issue of spending a good amount of time on this build.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to affect people more and more as the weather improves in the Northern Hemisphere as well. We're gearing up for summer here. I feel like I've been spending a bit more time outside, so I've not had as much time to spend in Minecraft either, which is why the survival guide doesn't really feature in my quick login this week. I am down to the last 3 chunks of my dig on Minecraft SOS though. And that's going to be a really big milestone because on Tuesday, tomorrow at the time of this recording, I'm going to be streaming an event where teams of 2 are going to compete to dig out a chunk fastest. So to make things interesting, they're going to be required to silk touch and collect all of the ore blocks in a chunk so that people don't just leave absolutely everything to despawn and focus on just tearing the entire thing down. There are going to be like time penalties that apply for any ore blocks that they miss because I can take a schematic of the entire chunk using Lightmatica and that will print a material list of like any blocks that are a part of that chunk materially. So I can make sure that they collect all of the diamonds, all of the redstone, all of that stuff, and then maybe deduct a few seconds here and there for any blocks that they miss. But that's going to be an event on the server that's going to allow the winning teams to earn fate coins, which are used to revive people on this sort of semi-hardcore server. So it's kind of a timely thing because it is now more expensive than ever to revive our server mates. We're probably getting close to the end of Minecraft SOS's lifespan as far as people's projects and how expensive it's getting to revive people now. So I think this is a fun, like, I guess, climax for the whole digging environment, but then that's basically the turning point for me, at which point I have to start rebuilding everything in the sky. So while it feels like the end of an era, it's also the beginning of a fresh era for me, and trying to figure out what I'm going to do with the surrounding machinery that's going to be digging this whole thing out.
It's really cool that you've been able to fold the idea of helping you get the dig finished into a game for the whole server that they can then reap the rewards from. Yeah. And I was thinking about this as you were talking about the bunny, the unorthodox pet protection program from last week. And I'm wondering, does anybody on the SOS server have like real life experience in like event planning or like office like team building stuff? I know a couple of people in podcasting that's what they used to do for a job, and like they would organize excursions for like, rafting or even if it's just like a get together at a restaurant, there'd also be like party games. And the idea is just to try to like loosen everybody up and have some fun. And it just kind of seems that like some of the ideas are just so good in terms of really different. Like it's not just, go do Minecraft task. It's not an achievement within the game. The pet thing, the chunk clearing thing, I can't remember what are the other examples that you gave, but like they all seem to be pretty unique in terms of those games. Like, do you know if anybody has that kind of background?
I mean, I'm not certain professionally, like outside of Minecraft. Obviously, we have Scott Smager on the server, who's one of the people who coordinates Minecraft Championship behind the scenes.
Right. Okay.
And so like we've had like a big kind of pot of ideas going in behind the scenes on SOS for a while, where different people have been contributing, and not everybody is putting together an event like this. Like Eloise had her headhunting event recently. I think Mog Swamp is planning a talent show. There's like a few things like that people are coming up with, but it's not like a requirement of participation. It's just something people are encouraged to do.
Right.
And there are a couple of people have been putting more of their creativity into the official server events that happen sort of every other Tuesday is sort of when we launch them. So yeah, there's like a few people I think maybe have a background in that kind of stuff, but we're all just Minecraft people at this point, and it's so easy to tailor these things specifically to challenges that we can do in game that I think it's nice and easy for us to come up with ideas like this on the fly. And in my case, this just came up organically as I want to have people help me with this. And it was an idea I mentioned offhand on streams a couple of times, but I kind of thought nobody's really going to be interested in doing this because it's such a long, drawn out, and potentially kind of boring project. And then a couple of people were incredibly eager to help and had a really good time doing the dig. And so I thought, okay, I can incentivize this. And during the later stages of the server, when we're looking for ways to earn the currency that helps us revive people, it's sort of a good way to pitch that to the group in general. So we're going to have 3 teams of 2. There's going to be probably a bit of live commentary from me, although I also have a section of Ancient City that is still exposed at the bottom of it. There are no chunks above that to be dug out anymore, but that's been really fun as well, having like a look at that, a look at the geodes that I've been tearing out in the process of this, which have only been 1.5, basically. 1 geode I had to destroy in its entirety, but 1 just got sliced off and left in a wall. So there's lots of little things I've been uncovering as I dig, but this is really the final stretch.
I've not spent a lot of time in and around geodes. I found one and I set up a farm for myself if I ever want to go back and get some more amethyst. But I never tire of seeing a geode cut in half in like a perimeter dig or any kind of like chunk to bedrock kind of idea. It just looks so cool. It looks precisely like when you see that kind of mineral deposit in real life and you see somebody that knocks a rock in half and you get to see the inside of something.
Yeah.
It just feels like, I don't want to say it's not magical, but it just feels so strange to think that this brightly colored thing is inside essentially what we think of as like the dirt,
Yeah.
like the ground, brown and gray. And then it's got this beautiful purple and white, pattern inside. It's really interesting, which is funny because like there's been granite and diorite for ages, but no one ever thinks like, ooh, pretty when they see granite and diorite. Well, I don't anyway. But the geodes are definitely up there. I can see the appeal for people wanting to help out with the big dig too, because as much as I wouldn't necessarily say, I'm going to start a new project, I'm going to dig something that's going to be vast and I'm excited about it, the fact that Cosmic on the server wants me to help them make a mob farm with the idea of it being underneath Somerville to then reduce the amount of spawns that happen on the surface so that they don't have to light things up specifically, and we can get a bunch of stuff underneath the surface spawning. So it's not meant to be an efficient mob farm. It's just meant to be a really large one that's just kind of like going to have a lot of spawns happen. And I'm really looking forward to it because like it's not my build. I don't have to worry about decorating it. It takes the pressure off of all the creative decisions that you have to make every single time you stream from West Hill. It's just like map out the square, dig it.
Yeah.
And then like make sure that the platforms or however you're going to move the mobs around, implement those systems. Very simple because of the size. It's not meant to be a super efficient farm because if it keeps on, well, I guess it depends. If it keeps on flushing mobs, then it's more likely for them to spawn underground, I guess. But there's a few technical things I have to look at. But I'm looking forward to the project because it's going to be very straightforward.
Yeah.
And it's not even going to have an outside because it's just going to be completely buried. So in a lot of ways, like I've always wanted to do kind of like one of those etho caves that he did early on in his series, because you don't have to worry about decorating the outside. It's just what it looks like from your point of view inside, right? It takes the pressure off.
Yeah, and part of the fun of this has been just knowing what I'm going to be doing on streams for the foreseeable future, at least up until this point, where like all I have to do is I log in, I dig another chunk of this thing out, and that's it, that's done. And we've had James from Loading Ready Run on the show before, where his whole thing is streaming the punching of chunks like this, although he doesn't use a beacon in the same way that I do, because his focus is not getting it done, it's the process, and it's just being able to have something to log in and do in Minecraft, and he's decorated that stuff now. It's really funny actually looking at the thumbnail from that episode compared to where he ended that season of his Punch a Chunk project, which I think ended fairly recently, and there's so many like little tweaks he's made around the outside, and the pattern is bigger and is different and has kind of taken a completely different shape. So yeah, he's popped into this stream every so often just to see like how far along is my dig, and how many chunks are left in the project. But yeah, it's kind of partly his influence that has inspired me to keep going all this time. All right, moving on into the news, we had a Java Edition snapshot along with a Bedrock Edition beta that did a lot of the same things. So we'll cover the Java snapshot as we tend to do. Java Edition snapshot 24W19A arrived on May 9th, swiftly followed by a B snapshot that just provided a bug fish for a crash that happened when a villager died. One quick quote from the changelog article before we get into the changelog itself. Last week's snapshot introduced some changes to the Mace that went undocumented in the 24W18A changelog. To clear up any confusion, they've decided to add those changes to this changelog, but they've also updated the previous one. So if you want to know anything about the Mace changes, they should be in both changelog articles now. So to recap those Mace changes from 24W18A, they've raised Mace durability from 250 to 500, reduced the base damage to 5, and lowered the attack speed from -2.4 to -3.5. They've also reduced the density damage per level per block to 0.5, and the smash attack damage now has a fall-off. The first 3 blocks you fall will give 4 damage per block, the next 5 blocks you fall give 2 damage per block, and any blocks you fall after that add 1 damage per block. Along with that, Density and Breach enchantments are now incompatible with each other and the other damage enchantments you could apply to a mace, which are Smite and Bane of Arthropods. The changes in 24W19A include that blocks frozen by Frostwalker now emit the block placed vibration, which is frequency 13 if you're using Skulk sensors to detect that. There are a few changes to sounds, including 4 new cave ambience sounds, and replaced the turn off and turn on sounds for the copper bulb with 1 toggle sound. There's also improved chunk loading performance in this snapshot. When reading an already generated chunk from disk, surrounding chunks are no longer unnecessarily loaded. This is visible on the single-player world loading screen, and the new system uses less memory and CPU overhead. The technical changes in 24W19A include the datapack version now being 43. The custom data component can now be specified as an SNBT string to preserve type information in JSON. This is the same as is used in the set custom data loop function and the custom data predicate. The food item component has some new fields. Using convert to item with components, it is an optional field that allows custom foods to replace eaten food with a specified item. Think eating a mushroom soup to replace that with a bowl, and you're along the right lines there. Registry decorated pot patterns has just been renamed to decorated pot pattern. They've removed the legacy tag directory names, removed the power NBT tag, and replaced it with the acceleration power tag with a number value that controls projectiles' acceleration and maximum speed. This affects dragon fireballs, the 3 different sizes of regular fireballs, breeze wind charges, player wind charges, and wither skulls. There is also a new NBT tag dimension padding for structures, which ensures that a structure does not generate through the edges of a dimension by adding vertical padding to its bounding box. So no more trial chambers sneakily making it underneath the bedrock. There are a bunch of new enchantment entity effect types, and the article goes into more detail about tags, including those which have been renamed in this update. The full details of that are on the changelog. There are a few fixed bugs of note in 24W19A, including a pretty old one where mobs would suffocate or go through blocks when growing up near a solid block. This also affects a couple of other bug fixes, including frogs suffocating when growing, and mobs being able to pass through fences with carpets on top when growing up. So good news for all of you early game animal farmers. Another older bug where launched falling block entities did not travel through portals has been fixed, along with players being kicked for spamming in a single-player world with cheats disabled, brewing stands resetting their brewing cycle when the chunks they're in were unloaded, boats and rafts moving into blocks when landing in less than 1 block deep water, dispensers dropping honey bottles unless an empty slot was available, and ender pearls being able to teleport players in spectator mode. Of course, at this stage in the snapshot cycle, there are a bunch of additional bug fixes and tweaks in this snapshot. You can find them in the Minecraft.net changelog article linked in our show notes.
With some of those bugs, I'm curious if there's ever been like a bastion that went above the bedrock in the Nether. I've not really sought a lot of them out, so I don't know, but it feels like it's more than just, I mean, the trial chamber is obviously what they were trying to fix, but I feel like it's good as like a whole to have that bug in there, because it, like, there's structures in the Nether that you wouldn't want to go outside the bounding box of the dimension. I'm not sure whether a bastion would be more likely to go through the bottom bedrock or through the top bedrock. I don't know how high or low they generally generate.
I think bastions and nether fortresses always generate at roughly the same height. I think they're always like...
Is that what it is?
Because when you find them, like the lava lake is always like 1 block below what you think of as the floor. Of like if you got a hoglin stables or something out there. Like, if they're out in a lava lake, they're always the same height. So I'm fairly certain that those are specifically designed not to work that way, but those are all fixed structures in the Bastion's case, right? Like, you don't get many variants on them. A nether fortress also has a fixed height, but is more procedurally generated. But I think this is of the most concern when you're looking at things like strongholds and trial chambers, which start off as one room and then procedurally generate a bunch of corridors and stuff, and it's more tied to the world seed. Yeah. And so I think there's a lot more scope for them to exceed the bedrock boundaries in the overworld.
Yeah. And thinking down the line, if this rule is in place for the end, if the end ever has new structures or any kind of expansion happening, then that would also be good. You wouldn't want a very cool new structure to be cut off by just like nothing, like the bottom of the nothing would feel very strange. Like in one way it could be kind of cool, kind of like the geode, you know, like if you had like when, I'm not sure if you've ever seen things like a woodland mansion or anything that's been cut off by like a new world chunk generation or something, where it's like it's cut right down the middle. That, I mean, it's kind of a novelty. I mean, it kind of breaks what it's supposed to be, but it's kind of like it's one of those game glitches that you're kind of like, all right, well, that's kind of neat actually to kind of see that cross section. It's like those old cross section of like Star Wars ships in those books, the cutaways where you never really see that angle or that view in the movies, but it's always kind of neat to know, oh yeah, okay, that's where the table is, and that's where the cockpit is, and that's the hallway, and all that kind of stuff is really cool.
I think between that and the Geodes, we're just excited about cross-sections this week. I think that's part of it. That's sort of also why I'm feeling such a fascination of looking down on this section of an ancient city in the dig that I have. But I think that the main thing to be concerned with this week is the balance changes, which apparently showed up last week and just were not documented in the changelog. And I'm not sure if that came up as part of player feedback. They're sort of wondering, why does the Mace feel so sluggish to use now? But I've not dipped into these snapshots to really play around with it. I was mostly curious about why they're adjusting the Mace now. And I presume this is part of a longer cycle of feedback that they've been receiving from people who've been using it. And at first I assumed maybe this is addressing the issues that players have with PvP balance with the Mace, but I think the problem is the damage curve they're applying to smash attacks still keeps it fairly lethal at short range. And if anything, I was assuming that the curve would be the opposite way round, right? Like, it sounds like you would want it to do less smash damage at shorter ranges to increase the reward for skill of hitting something accurately from a higher height. But I think part of that is like it's combining the slower warm up of the Mace before it can reach full power, and I think a lot of people had complaints about it being slower to use, not really working in the favor of like somebody who wants to use a wind charge and then switch to the Mace in that hand, and the Mace has to raise, and you're already coming down from the jump at that point, so the weapon isn't ready by the time you actually want to hit stuff with it. So I would not be surprised if we see a few more fine-tuning bits and pieces this week.
It sounds like in adding some balance, they might have removed some of the fun and some of the non-combat uses for it. Like, I remember you were on your stream where like using it to jump from rooftop to rooftop in a small desert village. And like, if it's too slow to do that, well, then that's a maybe unforeseen function, community discovered function or use for the Mace that has now been made either not impossible, but too difficult to be worth it. Or like, it's one thing to do that and say, okay, well, it can be done. But it's something else entirely to say like, oh no, this is a repetitive skill. Like, just like taking off with Elytra from standing with rockets. Like, once you get the timing on that down, it's really fun to do, but it's not a high bar. Like it's a little bit of learning, but after that, you're pretty solid. And I've not spent any time with the Mace really because one, my week was really busy, but also I didn't use it previously to compare the new timing with. But I'll say that those kind of timing attacks in video games, they've never really appealed to me. They always feel kind of telegraphed. Now, it's not a big deal, I guess, in Minecraft and PvE, but in PvP, if you could see any kind of wind up or delay, I'm not sure what it looks like from the other side, but if that's the kind of thing that you can see happening, then it becomes very easy to avoid. And in my case with RPGs, it was hard to aim. Like, you might have this big barbarian character that has a tree trunk that he's swinging around, but if he's too slow with it, like you end up, it's not fun because you can't hit anything with it, and I find that my character feels more powerful when they take something the size of a tree trunk and they move it faster than a normal person would. You're like, wow, okay. And it's like the Hulk. The Hulk is big, but he's also fast. It's not like he's slow. He can be slow if he wants to be, but if he's like doing something deliberate or lifting something really, really heavy for emphasis, they tend to show him doing it a little bit slower. But then his follow through, or even when he's just like punching stuff, he can be very fast. And I think that's the appeal. It's that OP nature. And I'd imagine that's very difficult to balance with the Mace, bringing it into the game and trying to balance that out.
Yeah, KMB in our live chat has a really good point, which is that Bedrock Edition does not have the same combat mechanics as Java Edition. They don't have attack cooldowns, and so the Mace could end up being a lot stronger in an environment that doesn't nerf the damage based on how much time since your last attack. So it's interesting to see these changes taking effect in Java Edition, with them not wanting to push it too far away from how the Mace works in Bedrock Edition, but still having to cope with there being two effective sets of combat mechanics. I think part of the problem for me is that the weapon cooldown isn't really a cooldown, it's a charge up. So but the first time you draw it, you have to heft the Mace for a couple of seconds before it's ready to swing. And I can understand why they don't do it the other way around, because then you'd just be able to cycle from one weapon to another weapon and the mace would instantly be ready without that penalty to it charging back up. But it really does sometimes feel like the mace should be ready instantly, get a quick hit off, and then take a little while to come back. The same way that it cools down when you're using ender pearls, for example. Like, I feel like if it was like that, or like a crossbow where you could fire it once but then you had to take the time to reload, then maybe there would feel like a bit more usability in that, and you'd be able to prep it instantly and then just have to wait for it to come back. But I don't know how difficult that would be to integrate into their existing vision for the mace. So it's a tricky one. I assume also Breach, which is the enchantment that allows it to ignore a percentage of armor, made the mace tougher to balance for close range encounters, which is why they've dropped the damage of that off a little bit and dropped the mace's base damage as well. Because before, it was effectively a substitute for a diamond sword. It still did the same amount of damage and could do more damage to certain targets in the same way that you can set up a diamond sword to. But most of the complaints I've seen have also revolved around it not being a substitute for a sword anymore. And so if you want to use it in combat more casually, it has to take up another inventory slot. And with the cooldown and the charge up time, you can't switch to it on the fly very easily. You have to be a lot more calculated about it, which a lot of Minecraft combat situations don't give you the opportunity to be calculated. A lot of it is reflex and responding to a situation that develops suddenly. So yeah, it's going to be curious to see how the mace gets used if they continue with these changes. I'm not the biggest fan of a lot of them. I sort of like the mace feeling like a sandbox tool where you could just go in and go ham, but I don't know if long-term that was going to be the best thing for the PvP scene and the vision they have for gameplay balance.
I wonder if the reverse curve that we're seeing in the power that it exerts, depending on, how far you're falling, had anything to do with, it being a little bit too easy to one-shot some powerful mobs in the game, like a golem or a wither. And granted, I understand it takes a really high skill shot to actually do, but I wonder if they just felt like, well, even though that's a high bar, the fact that you can still do it kind of then defeats the purpose of the wither entirely. Like, it's supposed to be a harder encounter. I mean, I say that, and that's a poor example because that's one of those ones that you can cheese anyway with Bedrock. But you know what I mean? Like those kind of events, it would be probably better to have it be more useful against smaller entities that you're going to deal with more regularly, and have it be less powerful against something bigger. So then you're going to be I would imagine they would want to encourage players to use either the cycle that the boss goes through, or just deal with those mobs in a way that they're meant to be dealt, or originally designed to be dealt with, as opposed to giving them kind of like a get out of jail free card with a big hit from the mace.
Yeah. We'll see if anything changes this week. We'll see if there's a bit of community feedback on that. But the problem is now you've got to take the negative feedback with a grain of salt, because people are going to respond negatively to anything where a damage gets nerfed, because people like to feel powerful in video games, right? But we'll see where the mace ultimately lands, and probably on top of the head of the nearest mob. For now, though, we're going to move on into chunk mail. A reminder that if you'd like to email the show, the email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. And you have another reason to email the show, which is that episode 300 is only 3 episodes from now, in which we are planning an all Q&A episode to celebrate that milestone for the podcast. We want to include as many members of the community as possible, and we'd like you to send in a 1-sentence question about anything you'd like to ask us. It could be about Minecraft, podcasting, other video games, inspiration, other experiences in life, etc. Keep them fun, and add 300 Q&A to the subject line of the email so that they can be easily organized for the show.
Our first email comes in from Valencia 1185. Nether portal infection. Hey, Pix and Joel. I was listening to your episode about the Nether, and I was wondering, what if when you lit a Nether portal, a bit of the Nether spread across the overworld? For example, if you had a portal going into a basalt delta, the ground and space around the portal in the overworld would change to basalt. After going through the portal a couple of times, the Nether would slowly corrupt the area around the portal in the overworld. I think this would make sense because when you find a ruined portal, there is netherrack and magma around it. I would love to hear your thoughts. Valencia 1185 died out of curiosity when she made a Nether portal.
So this mechanic sort of exists in Terraria. And it stems from a biome that is generated as part of the world when you load up a world for the first time. There is either a crimson biome or a corruption biome that slowly spreads. And it spreads more noticeably once you reach the midway point of the game, once you've beaten a certain boss and you activate hard mode, and there's some transformation that happens to the world at that point. I will note that long term it is a real pain to deal with, because if you're not keeping it in check and progressing your technology to the point where you can alter that and stave off the spread of the corruption, it can spread to areas of the world that you really don't want it to. And so often when that happens, the solution to it, or at least the easiest solution that players typically find, is to dig a massive box around the outside of it and then effectively spray paint the entirety of the inside of it so that it returns to a normal biome. There are items and bits and pieces in Terraria where you can do that, and it allows you to interact with things on a much larger scale than you typically do in Minecraft. But the control of that and the upkeep of that is kind of a polarizing thing. Like, I imagine a lot of Terraria players have just accepted it as a fact of the game, and it's a much more action-focused game than Minecraft is. But if bits of the world started to alter themselves in Minecraft, I really don't know how I'd feel about that. How about you, Joel?
No, that's where my first thought was, and that is with the overworld blocks that this would affect, you would need it to be very specifically controlled. If I decorate a nether portal and then I put the nether portal in a build, in my base, in a very specific location, I may not want nether blocks on the other side to come into my build and spread. And it would be really strange if it replaced things that I had done on purpose. You know, like you create a flower garden or you create a spooky Halloween nether portal, but you don't want necessarily Soul Sand Valley creeping out into that, you know, if that's not part of the color palette that you've chosen. I think it reminds me of the question that they asked the devs one time at one of the Minecraft lives about like hurricanes. That kind of idea. Is that like it's destructive and you don't want that, like they're not fun in real life. Why would they be fun in a video game? You know, that kind of idea. And I think it also, to a point that you often make, is that I think it removes the idea that players could use that as a build, like as an idea. And I've seen it happen. Fix It on Vastin. That was one of the stories. The history of the world was that there was an invasion from the Nether, and these old Nether portals, he would decorate them, and it looked like spider webs of like netherrack and nether material, kind of like taking over the overworld. Kind of like anytime you've seen any kind of like fungal infection in a sci-fi movie, like that's kind of what it looked like. And I think that's a great idea for a build. And then you can control it. And hey, like if you want it to spread, like once a month, you've got to spread it, you know, like you've got to add that gameplay to your loop, you know, or, you know, take turns on a server of getting different people to spread it. So it does take kind of a mind of its own and you don't necessarily know how it's going to go each time, you know. That could be fun if the idea of signing up for it is that, say you've all built some things near the Nether portal, and every time you know, it spreads, a different person is assigned to spread it, and it's no holds barred. Everybody's already decided, like, your build could be changed by this, just FYI. But instead of you doing it the way that you would envision, someone else is doing it. I think that would be really a kind of a fun art and social experiment on a server. But I think if it did it on its own, I don't think it would be all that popular. And I think it would probably then influence where people would put nether portals. I would imagine if that was the case, they would start to put them out in the middle of nowhere. Because then there's no risk of it kind of encroaching on the things that you're actually building. I will say that it would be neat if players had an opt-in to it. So if it didn't do it by default, but if like you used crying obsidian to make the portal, if that was possible. Right? And say, okay, well, because you made it out of crying obsidian, it is now going to be a spreading portal. And maybe it would have a limit, like maybe it's only a few chunks, but it will do it, and it will do it at random, and you'll have to deal with it. But because you can sign up for that, you know what you're getting into. And then you could incorporate that into part of your build. And one of the challenges that I find when I'm building anything that's supposed to look natural is kind of turning off my human computer brain and not making a pattern. And if it is something that's randomly generated, then that could help with, you know, funny RNG accidents where it takes over a tree and that inspires you to do something either with that tree or similar to that tree. That could be really fun if you're signing up for it. I think that the devs making it in the game would just split the player bases like it, don't like it.
Yeah.
But if they said, hey, as an option, if you want, here's this cool new thing. But if you don't like it, don't bother with it. I mean, take the mace. If I don't find the mace all that interesting, I really don't have to mess with it. It's great for people that love it. And for people that don't love it, well, hey, like, you don't have to play with it. And I think that's a great way to approach a sandbox game like Minecraft.
Yeah, I think making the unstable portal or something like that seems like a really fun idea, and it would allow them to add something like this without changing what is, at this point, like, the Nether has been around for so long that it's basically a 15-year-old feature, and changing something that's acted a certain way for a decade and a half and forcing it on players like that is going to be a very controversial change. I think one of my main issues with mechanics like this is that, with the exception of there being different biomes, more or less every nether portal would end up looking the same. You would not have as much control over how it looked in a build, and it might be the case that you could surround it with blocks that couldn't be converted, say that you put non-solid blocks around, and like with skulk spread or moss or whatever, then it wouldn't take over certain blocks. But then every nether portal has to have the same decoration considerations as spawn proofing something does, and it just adds another level of maintenance that I think a lot of players would find that they wouldn't be very patient with. So I think that's part of the reason why stuff like this doesn't happen already. If you like the idea of this, though, it is an approach that they have taken in other Minecraft spin-off games, like Minecraft Legends. The whole story is the piglins spreading corruption through the overworld using nether portals. And while that's not part of the vanilla Minecraft experience, it's at least a thematic idea that, on a certain level, Mojang agrees with. And so I think you can still have fun decorating stuff in that style in the sandbox environment of vanilla Minecraft without it feeling like a permanent change to your existing world. Moving on to email number 2. This is going to be our main discussion for this week, actually. We got an email from Chino with the subject of place naming. Dear Pix and Joel, thank you for nearly 300 episodes of essential Minecraft news, commentary, and content. Joel, would you consider reverting the name of the Spruce River Inn in West Hill back to the West Hill Inn? Similar and confusing names like this were common in medieval times, and later, and add an element of verisimilitude to West Hill. On this note, for both of you, how important is place naming to you when playing in a world? Do you go around naming geographic features like an explorer would? Cheers, Chino. Chino was killed by a zombie in West Hill because he booked a room, arrived at dusk at the wrong inn, and was caught outside in the dark.
I thought this would be a fun discussion to springboard out and talk about not just like West Hill or the names for different places in Minecraft worlds, but also like, how do you name things in a video game when you're in the sandbox world, and like what you and I might do, because we've got, you know, a lot of experience in Minecraft, you with several different worlds, and then me with one long-term world. Like how does that naming affect our gameplay? Quickly to answer the thought about West Hill, I'm not going to be reverting the name of the Spruce River Inn. I feel like it makes more sense to me, and it's less confusing when talking about builds and locations around West Hill. And that's more so for communication to the people on stream that are watching the video than it is about like maintaining any semblance of realism in the world. I mean, like, I'm not worried too much about realism in a Minecraft world made of meter blocks. Like it's more of a keeping things straightforward and not just repeating the same things over and over again, which was the problem, because what had happened was I had the West Hill River, which goes through the town, and then I had the West River, which was just named briefly because I didn't have a name for it, and it was on the west side of the valley. But that became a problem when you've got like the West River Inn and the West Hill River Inn. I was like, you know what? Let's just change it to Spruce River. It's on the west. Everybody's going to know that. That's fine. And I think it made the West Hill River and West Hill feel a little bit more unique than keeping it as the West River. And also, you know, we've experienced this all the time with names for things in Minecraft being similar in the news reads, and it rolls off the tongue a lot easier. Like Spruce River Inn, West Hill River Inn. I know one's east, one's west. That's fine. It doesn't necessarily need to be, you know, bang on. And that's where it's a light fantasy theme in terms of the medieval idea. I'm not trying to be true to history so much. And I think that it might limit me if I did that. Like if I started naming things after, stuff in Tolkien, well, then people would wonder why one thing was Tolkien related, but then other things weren't.
Yeah.
So I feel like I kind of have to come up with my own stuff. So in the broader sense, though, like when it comes to naming things, and I'm going to start like at the very, very top. When you're dealing with naming something like either a YouTube series, a world in Minecraft, or if you're getting together with some friends, like with the Minecraft SOS server, like how do those names come about? Like when you do something with a group server, do you all get together, or does somebody have the idea and the name already built in and you're all just like, well, we're just along for the ride?
I think it varies by project, but when we've been talking about Empires or Minecraft SOS, the groups that I've been kind of playing with for the last little while, it was very much a group consensus thing. We would all throw out ideas for names and we would pick one that sounded good. But also, I think one of the more important things, especially for a YouTube series that's going to have its own identity, is that the world name hasn't already been chosen by somebody else, right? Like when it's got to have a brand of its own on YouTube, you don't want it confused with other people's videos. In the case of Empires SMP, I believe there was another project that was like a smaller group of people had an Empire SMP that was going for a while that we were concerned there might be some crossover with, but it turns out that, there wasn't really too much of confusion between our two groups. And honestly, like once we were done using the name after Empires Season 2, like they can continue using it and it's not a big deal, right?
Right.
And so with SOS, it was really formed around the concept of the SMP, the whole hardcore, but with revival and needing friends to revive you. The fact that the gravestone, when it appears, sends up a beacon that basically says, hey, I need reviving. And that kind of stuff, I think, is easy enough to name if you just kind of go through a few ideas. It was maybe going to be something to do with fates initially, because the fate coins are the things that we use to revive ourselves, but we settled on Minecraft SOS because it had Minecraft in the name, and SOS SMP just seems like a fairly easy thing to roll off the tongue. When it comes to my single-player worlds, each of them has been named around the series, and the series has more often than not taken a very, clinical naming approach. I mean, the Minecraft Survival Guide is what it says on the tin, right? And that's just for recognition. So I don't really start getting creative with names until I have stuff built out in the world and I want to start working with build themes and thematic stuff like that. How about you? How did the name of the Citadel come about? I think I can guess, but for the folks at home.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, the Citadel Cafe is my other podcast, and that's been around for 13 years. So it made sense on brand to just kind of like go with that. Also, I think I went from a single player world playing Minecraft for like a couple of months to very quickly wanting to create a server, and I just didn't want to have to ruminate on the name for very long. But to talk about the Citadel Cafe, there's actually 3 ideas that went into the name. The first is that Citadel Hill is a historic fort here in Halifax. And in the region, when you say Citadel, it invokes the idea of Halifax, the city where I grew up. And it also doubles as something that relates to the subject matter on the Citadel Cafe, which is sci-fi or fantasy entertainment. You can have a citadel in either. You can have a big citadel in something like Mass Effect. You can have a big citadel like Minas Tirith in Lord of the Rings. So it opens it up for kind of interpretation as to what you're talking about that week. And the cafe part is just, at the time I was spending a lot of time in cafes, drawing and hanging out with friends and chatting. And I feel like chatting is something I just kind of thought about as something that would happen in a cafe. And that was more of like communicating to someone that might listen to the podcast what it's going to be, a casual conversation.
Yeah.
There is only one other Citadel Cafe that I can find, and it's out in Alberta, I think, and it's actually a physical cafe. Like it's a coffee shop. So didn't confuse with the podcast. So that was good too. Something that's really interesting that people might not know, if you look at the logo for the Citadel Cafe, it's actually loosely based on the shape of Asgard, the main palace building in Asgard. If you see that in the first Thor movie, because I think that's around the time when the first Thor movie had come out or just come out.
Right. Yeah.
Was when we started the podcast. And then the Citadel server just took its name from the Citadel Cafe, but it also has that same sort of flexibility. Like, it doesn't really matter. Are you building a modern city in the 2020s? Are you building something like a castle? Are you doing something else? Is it sci-fi? So it really didn't limit the server. Like if I gave it, again, like to use Tolkien as an example, if I gave it a Tolkien related name, then the whole server would feel kind of like you had to build something fantasy, unless it was a name or a word that people wouldn't be super familiar with. But I feel like by not naming the servers anything too specific, it doesn't have that cloud of like, I should build this way with the people that are on it. And so that's how we did that. Now on the flip, the spawn town on the server was named Dartmouth Meadows. Now Dartmouth is the hometown where I'm from, which is all part of Halifax. It's now more of a neighborhood, but back when I was a kid, Dartmouth, Bedford, and Halifax were 3 separate municipal cities, and now it's all the Halifax Regional Municipality. But I'm proud to be where I'm from, and it's nice to kind of work that kind of stuff into stuff I do online. And the plains biome where we happened to set up the spawn town was just covered in flowers and really open between some hills and some taiga forests, and it looked really cool. And Dartmouth Meadows sounded better than Dartmouth Plains, right? It has a nicer ring to it. So that's kind of how that started. But those are the kind of things that I was putting into originally, thinking about the Citadel and those names. It was more about things from my life that I could relate, in the same way that I don't have a screen name. Like I just use my real name online, and I don't mind. I'm not putting my address online, but I like taking aspects of my life and putting it into the things that I do in world. I've often done that on games that I don't necessarily think I'm going to be streaming for a long time, but maybe I'll play for a little bit. I'll name, like my save Dartmouth, or I'll name my save the Citadel, or like just something like that, just for fun and branding and whatever.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where when you're playing Stardew Valley, you have to come up with like a name for your farm, and you'd be like, well, Dartmouth Farm, sure, why not? Yeah,
sure, exactly.
It's a nice, easy thing that, in some cases, naming stuff is almost just to like get that part out of the way, so you can focus on what am I actually going to do with this, right? But I think a name and a theme are so often things that coexist. Like when I was starting the first season of Survival Guide, I didn't just want to name my initial town Spawn, because I feel like that usually ends up being the case on multiplayer servers. Like it's actually kind of interesting that you have Dartmouth Meadows as the initial name for your spawn town, because it's one of the few servers I've heard of where Spawn isn't just called Spawn. Like you already have a name for it. Whereas on Minecraft SOS, it's definitely called Spawn, even though there's a bunch of fantastic builds there now, and there was a big kind of monolith where the fake coin thing started and everything. But I didn't want to name my first area Spawn on the Survival Guide series because that felt like a server community kind of thing, and I wasn't necessarily making a hub area that I would always want to come back to. I was making something that felt a lot more like a settlement. And so I decided on the name Founder's Forge, and again, that evokes more kind of like fantasy imagery. There was a ravine that I turned into like a geothermal thing, and the whole thing was meant to be like, it's a medieval style settlement with some fantasy touches. There are a lot of blacksmiths around. It's an area for sort of artisans and craftsmen to come and work, and that suits a lot of the things the player is doing in Minecraft. It's, smithing and a lot of anvils and stuff around, and crafting tools, and, looking for fuel sources and all that kind of stuff. So that obviously, inspired partly by Minecraft and partly through all of the fantasy literature that I've read over the years, seemed like a pretty sensible name for an area that I was starting out, working with campfires as they were added for the first time, and that kind of thing. But when it comes to Survival Guide Season 2, I never really came up with a name for the central area because I didn't end up doing as much building. And in Season 3, I have a few building motifs, but I don't have a strong theme for Season 3's builds in the area that I started out. Even the mountain that I chose as sort of the key landmark that I thought, this looks great, it looks very 1.20, I want to build stuff around this, with the cherry grove and the ice kind of coming off the mountain and everything. I didn't come up with a name for it right away, and I still haven't. I still just think of it as the Cherry Mountain, and I don't have a name for my central town because I think builds come with a theme. If I start a modern build area or a pirate town or any sort of like thematic construction project, a name probably arrives with it, I think. So like if I start like a pirate cove, then it's going to be called like Bounty Bay or something like that, something kind of stereotypical that's going to evoke that. And having a name along with it to begin with automatically suggests a few things to you, and you can come back to that as a resource for your creativity in a way where I feel like if I just want to play the game for the sake of playing the game and just add a few things here and there and not work with a specific theme, then I often find it harder to name something, and naming something doesn't have as many benefits as it does when you're thinking about a thematic build.
So with West Hill, that's what I found too with the theme. It's a lot easier to name things and have more creative names with a theme. So with the fantasy medieval vibes in West Hill, granted, I mean, West Hill kind of started off a little literal where it was on a hill, and in the west, there's a giant mountain that borders the entire west of where I wanted to make the town. So calling it West Hill, it rolled off the tongue nicely, and it was pretty descriptive. And I kind of thought, well, like if you think about a medieval town, like that's kind of, it's either named after a person or it's named after, a location, like it's the river name or, the wood name or something. And so that is kind of where I went for West Hill, but everything around there has been a lot easier to name. So things like the Smiling Goat, tavern, which is one of the inns on the east side. Like that to me, like it becomes a lot easier to do that kind of thing, because like if you have something called the Smiling Goat, and somebody doesn't know it's in a medieval build, right? If they just know that's a Minecraft build, like that could be anything. That could be a block pixel art goat with a smile. Like, like it could be anything. But if you say that it's called the Smiling Goat and it's in a medieval town, like you're really only thinking like inn or bar. Like you don't really think about anything else. Like it's not, the butcher shop is not called the Smiling Goat generally. And so that kind of stuff I think became a little bit easier. But also I find, and this is true of both like the Citadel at large, but also West Hill, unless I have more than one, it just gets referred to as what it is. So there's only one apothecary. I call it the apothecary. Yeah. There's more than one blacksmith, but I differentiate by calling one a blacksmith and one an armor smith. And like one is more of like a bring your horse here because there's a stable next door, and the other one has like swords and shields around, so it looks more like the person is crafting weapons and armor than they are shoeing horses. And it's also in a fancier part of town, things like that. So I find that a lot of the times the naming thing for me has just been descriptive, Northgate, West Garrison, the Keep, the Cooper, that kind of thing. And sometimes I wish that I had come up with more creative names, but also I decided early on that I didn't want to have signs with the names of the thing on the building. I wanted the challenge to be for you to look at it as a player and go, that's a blacksmith, or this is obviously, a potions place, or this is a butcher shop, because when I walk in, there's like a pig head on the table and there's like redstone blood on the ground, like just stuff that you can do in Minecraft to really help communicate that, which is part of the fun and part of the challenge. And what I did was with the armor statues data pack, excuse me, I was able to take items and then hover them on the signs without having to write that this is an apothecary. I could just hover a fire resist potion on the sign, and it just from playing video games like what that is. It's a potion shop. Yeah. Same thing with putting crossed swords over the barracks, or putting a fish next to on a sign for a fish dealer, like that kind of stuff. And I thought that was a lot more fun than just putting a sign down and writing the name. So as a result, I haven't really put a lot of time into naming some of the things around West Hill. And in the Citadel, it's the same idea. It's called the Guardian Farm because it's the only one we have. Now, if there was more than one, it would be Joel's Guardian Farm or Macast's Guardian Farm, or the big one versus the small one. They get very descriptive. Like I have two Wither Skeleton farms. One's the old one, one's the new one, or the big one or the small one. Because it hasn't become that important. And so many of the builds early on the Citadel were functional redstone farms, and they were just descriptive. And so it made a lot more sense when you told someone like, no, go down the east tunnel or the desert tunnel and go to the Wither Skeleton farm. Like you'll know it when you see it because you know what you're looking for. If I called it like, I can't even think of a name off the top of my head right now. Like if I called it the badassery, like no one's going to know what that is. Like they have to first know that the badassery is the wither skeleton farm,
Yeah, yeah.
in order to get there. So I find that a lot of times I'm guilty of just calling things in Minecraft like what they are. And it's only been my experience with Westa where I've decided to start like expanding that. And I'm looking forward to doing more in the new builds that I do, like say a sci-fi theme or something like that, coming up with stuff because you have even more freedom because like it's completely fiction. So like you can call things whatever you want. And I think that could help because rather than referring to things as like the cactus farm or the dye factory or whatever, you can come up with something more unique and fun, whimsical. Like I think that's something that Minecraft really lends itself to, which is being able to call something a name that's really wild and out there. Because of the cartoony nature of Minecraft, you can have some whimsy and it will still sell as opposed to having to stick to like super realistic stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to somebody who has a copper aging machine that is named David. I mean, it's that joke obviously springs from the name David Copperfield, who is both a Dickens character and more recently a TV magician. And the fact that it started as a field where I just laid out copper 4 blocks apart before it became the contraption that it is. But that's why it's now David 6.0 when I build it in the current incarnation, right? So it's gone through a few iterations. But like you look at people who've designed iconic farms throughout Minecraft's history, you look at like Tango Tech's iron farms. It was the Iron Titan for the longest time, and I think the Iron Phoenix later when some mechanics changed and it had to be able to reset itself. But again, the Phoenix there kind of implies some of the mechanics of the farm, right? It is able to restore itself from if it breaks. That's effectively how that works. And the Titan obviously feels like a good, strong name for the fact that it's all these iron golems and like really tough mobs and tough material that it's producing, but also the scale of it, the size of it, and the amount of output that you get as a result. So I think there are some things that even if they are mechanically driven, they're not necessarily places so much as they are farms. They lend themselves to like naming conventions like that. But so often it comes with the design of the farm rather than your specific build of the farm or the location of it or anything like that. But if I decided to call my little iron farm on the Survival Guide Season 3 world Iron Forge or something like that, I would have to live up to that name somehow, right? I'd have to build some stuff around it that really felt like, a dwarven town or some kind of like, mystical site where the first iron ever was created. And it's a 3 villagers and a zombie in a box, It seems like such a silly and ostentatious title, but that's also what drives creativity in Minecraft and what gives you the vision to follow through with those projects. Whereas you look at something like a Nether Hub, I feel like so often those are going to be very descriptive and nobody really names their Nether Hub, or you might say it's the such and such, like the Season 6 Nether Hub or the Season 8 Nether Hub if you have a server that's got sort of multiple iterations. But I don't feel like anyone ever deviates from that by calling it like the Trans-Dimensional Gateway Place. Maybe if you've got a really strong theme that you're building with, I'm pretty sure in Season 9 of Hermitcraft, Tango Tech built the library kind of thing around it, and I think that might have had a name to it at the time, just again for inspiration's sake, but I think everyone more or less referred to it as the Nether Hub rather than like the Interdimensional Library or anything like that. So I think there are some things that are hard-coded almost into a Minecraft player's understanding of what a world is. The Stronghold never gets called anything other than the Stronghold. The Bastions all have names, but those are just to differentiate the different designs. There aren't too many things in Minecraft that name themselves anything other than what they are, just a description of things. There aren't like named locations that pop up as generated structures. All of that stuff is up to the player. And so it depends on the player's approach, really, how heavily you use naming conventions and how much you just want to use the game's terminology and incorporate that into your own vocabulary.
And Minecraft is so vast. A lot of the times you're naming things like you want to on a map because you want to be able to know like this is the north this or the south that, or the iron farm is the east iron farm, or like it helps you, or at least on maybe a multiplayer server, navigate around. It's the same thing with player bases. Like if there's multiple players having different builds in a server, unless it's been really ingrained in the culture on the server, you're going to refer to it as Fwip's base or pixel rift base or pixel rift hole.
The hole, yeah.
You could have you could have a really fancy name for whatever it is you're doing on SOS, and people are probably just going to call it the hole or the dig, right? Because that's what has just kind of caught on. And I think because Minecraft players tend to have that efficiency mindset a lot of the time, that you just end up calling it whatever is the shortest, most descriptive way to assign it or to describe it to another player. And I think there could be some real fun in that something that they asked about in the email that Chino asked about was about naming like features in the world, which I've not done. I tend to name builds or things that I've actually done or dug, but not just like there's a really cool mountain that's untouched. For example, that mountain next to West Hill doesn't have a name. It's just the mountain next to West Hill. I mean, it's the only mountain for miles. So if you say the mountain, everybody knows what I'm talking about. But it's one of those things where it could and would likely have a name in the real world, like, Mount Spruce or like, who knows, right?
Yeah.
And that could be really helpful in a Minecraft world, especially if people don't have the best sense of direction. You could be just like, all right, well, that rock that looks like a thumb, you're like, we'll call it Thumb Rock, and that way, that Pixel Rift's built his base just west of Thumb Rock. So, all right, well, first find Thumb Rock and then go west and you find Pixel Rifts. So that kind of stuff could be really helpful, but also, again, like really whimsical. And it doesn't have to be a physical description. Well, that's usually the easiest way to do it. But it could also be either an event that happened on a server where everybody was there, similar to, I guess, like Spawn Town, like you were talking about that earlier. That's where everybody first arrives. That's where you have your first kind of gathering and intro on like a series if someone's content creating. But it could also just be something where like, your first dog died in Minecraft, or maybe it's the place that you died and you can call it Death Mountain or something like that. And just because it's a player experience and you can just use it to remember. I mean, in your head, maybe like you're just thinking like, well, that's the place that I died. And I remember seeing those kind of trees there. But over time, you could probably name it something. And I feel like that's another thing that's important too, is that I don't often come up with names first. I tend to build in an area, and then as I'm walking around and get a feel for it, then I tend to come up with a name.
Yeah.
I think the only thing I named first was maybe Dartmouth Meadows, but I had to see it before I had that name in my head.
Yeah.
Whereas with West Hill, like I tend to name things or think about stuff after I've been walking around a little while and you kind of get a feel for it. And especially on like a multiplayer server where there's different things, like I can't remember how long Cosmic was building Somerville on the Citadel before it was called Somerville. It was a while, and it was very bright and very flowery, but it wasn't called Flower Town, like, which would have been obvious at first. And no one else named it either. I think that's also interesting on a multiplayer server, is that you don't tend to hear other players giving names to things that other people have built.
Yeah.
It tends to be the player itself, the player themselves that has named the thing. But I think there could be really some fun opportunities. I mean, if you're a content creator, you maybe don't want to open it up to the public unless you're really content with something being called Bodie McBoatface. But there's risks and stuff like that. But maybe voting or ideas and brainstorming and stuff could be fun too, especially if you have a really fun community. Because sometimes in jokes or puns, like for example, I name all my tools in Minecraft. I completely forgot to put this in the notes, but a lot of my tools are very punny names, and they're very often like female name and then some sort of pun that has to do with the tool itself. Wendy the Stone Whisperer for my Silk Touch pickaxe, like that kind of thing. Yeah. And there's usually some alliteration in there if I can figure it out. So that kind of stuff I think is fun, because then I'm not, I don't necessarily refer to my pickaxe as Wendy, but in my head, I'm thinking I want the Stone Whisperer as opposed to the Harriet the Hammer, I think is maybe my fortune pickaxe. And to the chat, I'm calling it a fortune pick or a Silk Touch pick, but in my head, I've organized it in a way that I can do it a little bit differently. And I think that just helps when you're just scrolling through names and items in Minecraft, and you're seeing the same stuff over and over again in a list of enchants. It's just so much easier to name something really specific. I guess a lot of times on multiplayer servers, people put their name in their tool in case it's left somewhere or you die and somebody has to pick up all your gear.
Yeah, I mean, in a game with pickaxes, pixel riffs kind of writes itself into a lot of those names.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, naming tools is another one. Like it has a function though. Like often if you're scrolling through your hotbar and the name of something appears above your hotbar, it's easy enough to tell without having to mouse over it to see the enchantments what the pickaxe you're using at the time is and whether it has silk touch or not if you've got that stuff there. So yeah, it's got a few important functions. And on the subject of the tools Minecraft gives you to name stuff, I don't know how much of this you have done, especially in a town as dense as West Hill, but the fact that you can rename banners, hang them in the world, and then right-click on them with a map to have the banner display the name on the map is really cool for stuff like this, because if you've got a world map, you can have labels that say West Hill, Dartmouth Meadows, Modern City Project here, insert name later kind of thing. You can have all sorts of labels on your world. I made a map of the Survival Guide Season 3 sort of central build area that I don't think of as spawn even, because spawn was over by where the iron farm is, and I actually moved a few hundred blocks before I even started building. But everything there, for the episode I made about banners and maps and stuff, I labeled it. So I have the mud factory here, I have the starter house, the storage building, the nether portal, like just to kind of demonstrate that those things are there. But the fact that you have the capacity to label things in-game in the first place is all part and parcel of this idea. The idea that, as a player, you have the agency of naming whatever it is you want and having that name show up in your world permanently.
I've thought about it in West Hill. I don't know whether it would work on the density level. I think it might be a problem on a handheld map, but it might be okay if it was like on a wall.
Yeah.
That kind of idea. I don't use banners in the world that much, so I would have to like bury them underneath the building. So there'd be a lot of like digging underneath something. But then again, like, I'd have the same problem of like, it's just the apothecary. Like, it's not going to be anything super fancy. In a way, I guess it keeps it short. So in a dense area, that might be good. I've actually thought about taking a screenshot with the map tool that I have, the mod, the Zeros mini map, or world map rather, and taking that to another website, like the kind of websites that help you build maps for like tabletop RPGs.
Yeah.
And getting like a sepia tone, kind of look like a hand-drawn Tolkien-esque kind of map vibe to then give to everybody on the server and be just like, hey, if you come to West Hill, like if you're looking for a specific build, here's where it is. And it's not going to be like a Minecraft map, but it'll at least get you there. And I could also just take a screenshot of the map mod and do it in a photo editing program as well. But I've thought about that as a kind of a final kind of like cherry on top to say like, hey, if you want to come and reference this stuff, then this is where it is. But it's one of those things where I don't particularly enjoy the maps in Minecraft. I much prefer the mod. So because I don't like the look of them, they tend to, like, the colors are all really flat and it doesn't really look as nice on a wall. So I may or may not do it. There's definitely a wall in the keep that used to have a map on it, and somehow they all just stopped working. So I'm not sure what happened over the course of the 3 years I've been building, but some update along the way ended up breaking the maps. And I've thought about going and doing it again, especially now that I've got so much more built, because it would look a lot cooler. Because at the time it was like the perimeter wall, a couple of buildings, mostly grass, some weird looking terrain. But now that the whole valley is done, I think it could be really interesting to get like a map of the entire valley and hang it almost like a tapestry in West Hill. I think the trick there is that I just have to make peace with, or find another mod that has in-world maps have different colors, has like in-world colors. It probably exists, and that I don't think wouldn't be too bad. Like that would just be like a little texture tweak here and there. But yeah, I've definitely thought about that. So when it comes to like naming something in your world, like a Dwarven Forge or whatever, how do you go about doing it? Like, how do you come up with the name? Do you just kind of sit there until you come up with anything? Do you use any external tools to come up with anything? Any patterns?
I think in the past I've done enough like little forays into sci-fi and fantasy writing that a lot of those names will occur to me more naturally. I think there's a lot of inspiration you can bring in from Minecraft itself, like your Smiling Goat Tavern. There are goats in the game. It doesn't take too much to do that. You can very easily be like Axolotl Bay if you want it to be like a pirate bay that's got like a lush cave nearby, and you find them kind of coming up through the ocean. So there's a lot of environmental stuff you can take from that before you even start. If you're building something iconic there, then maybe that's the first thing that was built there and it gets centered around that, and so you have like Lighthouse Town or something like that very easily. But then there's a lot of great fantasy name generators out there if you don't have that, part of your brain that generates fantasy ideas, and so there are so many good internet resources. I can't name them off the top of my head, but I'm fairly certain there will be fantasynamegenerator.com or something like that, very easily, a Google search away for you. And yeah, outside of that, I think Minecraft itself has a lot of creatively named stuff. There are some things that are named based on how the materials that exist in the natural world, but you've got things like Skulk. You have creatures that are uncommon for the real world. You have things like Striders and whatnot. So you can easily, either take or portmanteau a couple of Minecraft names together and come up with something that suits a little closer to the vibe you're going for.
I've not thought about the fantasy generators. I used to use stuff like that when I was playing more MMOs, but I've always felt like I was clicking forever. Like it would just be generating and generating and generating, and it'd be just like key smash or something hard to pronounce, or like I don't even know what that means. Maybe it could mean something. What I found really useful when I was doing names for characters for MMOs was looking up descriptors, like adjectives that I wanted to associate with the character in a different language. So my warlock in World of Warcraft was named Visvoro, and it was loosely based on eviscero, which is Latin for rip, and voro is one of the words for consume or eat greedily. Mm-hmm. And so like rip or disembowel and consume for a warlock was a pretty fun name. Yeah. But it wasn't literal. Like I didn't call him like, gut muncher. Like I called him Visvoro because it had a little bit more of a serious sound to it. V's and Z's and things like that sound a little bit more evil. Granted, he was an alliance character, but like warlocks tend to be a little bit shady.
Sure, yeah.
And so that kind of stuff I thought was really cool. And you could do the same thing for, if you found a really cool waterfall in Minecraft, you could start looking up different names from different cultures, or, especially if, for me, like English is my first and only language. So looking up things from different languages is really cool, because then even though you might be able to look up the meaning of something in like Spanish or German, then folding it into a word that you kind of made up and having like a couple of German words, or like combining a couple languages, it just makes it more unique and then means more and feels less like, website generated, kind of like, this is just built on the sounds that we hear in fantasy or sci-fi or whatever. I've had some fun with those. I can't remember. They're not really generators. It's more like a simple little quiz where like your Jedi name is like the last two letters of your first name and the first three letters of your mother's maiden name, and then combined with the first name of your first dog or whatever, and like all that ends up being like your Jedi name. Mm-hmm. And so you can find stuff like that online too. And I'm not sure, a lot of it seems to be focused around naming characters as opposed to naming places, but I'm sure there's probably resources for things like tabletop gaming, Dungeons and Dragons, where you can come up with the names for towns, or it just has ideas for towns. Like when you're doing DM stuff, do you come up with the names for the towns or the churches or the locations, or are those things that you pull from like a guidebook?
It depends. Like all of the stuff that I've done as a home DM for like the group that I started with, where I was DMing more or less exclusively, like I started looking up stuff from the lore of D&D from like the existing kind of source books, but then I realized that I was going to have to keep hold of a lot of the details of that if I wanted it to feel like canonical to the setting. So I very quickly decided to pull a bunch of stuff that, some of which I'd already written in like sci-fi and fantasy short stories before, that I was like, I want to reuse that name because the stories aren't published anywhere online. If they were, like, it's still my material to use, so I can come up with that stuff. Like, the central city, I wanted to have a very different naming convention to standard, like, fantasy towns, and I'd written a story a while ago where an entire kind of nation of people named their cities more anatomically. So the capital city was called the Beating Heart, and that was just its given name. And so that's what I named the city in my D&D campaign that the characters are currently stuck in. And maybe that has some more implications for the story further down the line, but like how it got that name is lost to history at this point, so you can kind of do whatever you want with that. And it implies a certain element about the culture. It is like the lifeblood of the area. It's the most important city in the lands around. Everybody knows it, and it feels like anatomically necessary to both the setting and the story. So I think there's some fun things like that where you don't necessarily have to go fully into, this name sounds typically fantastical and is just a made-up language or something like that even. You can just decide that instead of naming things after a person or having, words that are in different languages, you can mash up words from existing languages and just generate a name that nobody would call this place, the Screaming Head or whatever, but maybe that's just what they decided to call it because of a weird rock formation you saw in the distance. Thumb Mountain, it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
I remember on the first decidedly vanilla server, back when I started playing Minecraft online with folks, there was a mountain off in the distance near spawn, which looked like, from a specific angle, looked like a dog with a bone in its mouth, and so that got called Dog Mountain, and it was the same the same thing, right? And when you actually got up there, when you surmounted Dog Mountain and looked out around from the top, obviously it looked nothing like a dog from there. It was actually a lot flatter on the top than you'd expect a dog's head to be, and but just from a certain angle from spawn, it was Dog Mountain. So stuff like that can come up very easily, and you don't have to think too hard about it, I suppose, if you want to come up with something that's just going to last for a while.
And I find, too, if you've got a dry sense of humor, then you can also go a very, very simple road. Like, one of the plans I have for the sci-fi area that I want to do is to get some villagers, to do the villager trading, depending on what happens with the new updates, and like explore that mechanic. Because we have an old villager trading hall, but I've not really set something up properly. And I'm just like, I don't really want to have to deal with like naming all the villagers or figuring that all out. I was just going to give them numbers. Mm-hmm. Start with 1 and see how far we go. Which one is the Silk Touch guy? That's number 7. Like, I don't,
it becomes like The Prisoner when number 6 tries to escape.
Yeah, that kind of stuff, right? That kind of stuff I just find funny. Just it's almost like your distaste for or annoyance with villagers is just like it's reflected in what you decide to call them.
Yeah.
I see that a lot sometimes on Escal 85's work, where he will just name a villager like Larry, just the first name that comes to mind.
Yeah.
And it's silly. It's usually a kind of a non sequitur. It's got nothing to do with whatever cool, whimsical theme he's doing. It's just like, it's almost funnier when you've got like a cool sci-fi build and your villager's name is Bob. Just really left field kind of stuff. And I do find that kind of stuff entertaining, but it also helps you when you want to keep it straight. If you got 20 of them, you got to find Bob. If you know that that's the one that you're looking for, rather than like, there's 6 villagers, all of whom have the same garb on, and because of how they're stored, you can't really tell outside of their profession what you might be looking for. If they're all librarians for book trading, then like they're all really going to look the same. So giving them different whimsical names, or putting that on a sign, like either it's a name tag or a sign above their stall or whatever. Like I think you could have some fun with that. I feel like I've seen also people name animals or pets like that in Minecraft. Like if one doesn't make it, then the next one is called, Rover 2, Rover 3, that kind of stuff. I think my Elytra is Star Wars. I think it's called Red 5. Pretty sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't see. I named it once 7 years ago, and then I just died. I have not looked at it since. Right.
Yeah. But I think so much of that is what keeps a world memorable. It's like if it makes you laugh, if it makes you kind of giggle at spotting stuff like that, then it's doing its job, right? And like it doesn't have to be the perfect name for something as long as you can remember it and as long as it inspires you to stay creative. I think that's where we'll wrap up our discussion for today, but it's been a fun one, and I'm sure lots of people have fun stuff that they name things. We'd love to see people sharing that on socials, and let us know what you name your tools, your town, your spawn area, whatever it is. Let us know at the usual social channels. But for now, that's going to wrap up this episode of The Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting getting some value back in. You can visit patreon.com/thespawnchunks to join our community, where pledging at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every Monday, and join our monthly Minecraft audio hangouts, where our patrons let us know what they've been building in Minecraft that month. We currently have 324 patrons, which is back up 3 from last week. Thank you so much to the 3 of you for jumping on board. Of course, there is always room for more. And special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on social media. New episodes are available on Mondays on all of the major podcasting platforms. That includes YouTube. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Please use that email address. It's the only one that we check. The RSS feed is linked on the spawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by PixelRiffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/PixelRiffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season, and expect to see a few more episodes of that popping up once Minecraft SOS concludes. I'm also streaming 3 days a week on Twitch, where this week we will be doing the finale of the whole digging project on Minecraft SOS, and the beginnings of building everything up in the sky above it. That's where I do behind-the-scenes work for the YouTube series, and I sometimes play other games, like we mentioned Animal Well in the pre-show today. I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search, and aside from that, I'm at PixelRiffs on both Twitter and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything that I'm doing online can be found at joelduggan.com. That includes a link to the Citadel Cafe that I mentioned earlier, where the last episode where Stephen and I sat and talked about Fallout, the series on Prime Video. Had a good time talking about the entire first season, so it's full of spoilers, just FYI. You can also find me at Joel Duggan on social media, very easy to find. And of course, Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I stream Thursday through Sunday, and now with that Lego Friday in the mix, working on that Lego UCS not X-Wing, it's a TIE Fighter.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, but what do we call it?